Hello people! So the holiday season is already upon us, so I thought I'd help you guys out and make a phone buying guide, because that's the type of guy I am. So this is what's going to be happening. I will be highlighting the 8 best options you have in the field of phones. 3 of them consist of the best budget choices, because let's face facts, phones can be quite expensive, and the rest of the phones on this list are the best top-of-the-line phones you could buy. I'm obviously not going to be given a full review of each phone, because if I did, the video would be quite long, but I will be giving you guys a list of the pros and cons of each phone, and give you some valuable aspects of each, like the battery life, the camera, display size, and so on. I am also planning on making additional videos with the best tablets, Bluetooth speakers, headphones, and more, so subscribe to the channel for that. But with that said, sit down, get comfortable, and let's do this.
Go.
Let's begin with the budget phones. Now, don't get misleaded, these are excellent phones that will satisfy the needs and wants of most people. So topping off the list is the 2nd gen Moto G. So the positives. This phone has a 5-inch 720p display that looks absolutely fabulous. It only cost $180, completely off contract. It has a good build quality, it runs a stock build of the Android OS, and that is a big positive because it will receive updates quickly, and because it's a stock build with no modifications, the phone runs very fast and smooth, much like an iOS device. It also has a quad-core Snapdragon CPU, 1GB of RAM, which is good for a budget device. The last notable feature is its audio. The Moto G 2nd Gen has dual front-facing speakers, and this is just an awesome feature to have. So as an overall package, the Moto G is unbeatable at only $180, but some negatives go as following. The camera on the Moto G is 8 megapixels, and it's so-so. It can definitely get the job done and make some good-looking photos in the right conditions, but in any less than ideal lighting conditions, the image becomes muddy and soft. The battery life on the Moto G is more than enough for most people. It comes in at 2070 milliamps, but this is listed as a negative because it should be more like 2300 milliamps. But like I said, for most casual people, this phone can last them a whole day. The last negative of the Moto G is that it does not have LTE for fast mobile data, but just like the last gen, it should be updated to have an LTE model soon. The next phone costs $350 off contract, and this is the Nexus 5, and the positives go as following. It has a 5-inch 1080p display, a slim build, but one of the biggest positives of the Nexus 5 is its high-end specs. It's packing a quad-core Snapdragon 800 CPU clocked in at 2.3 GHz, 2GB of RAM, along with that fantastic 1080p display that I mentioned. And because this is a Nexus, it gets the latest updates from Google the fastest, so it already is upgradable to Android 5.0, which in itself makes the Nexus 5 feel and act like a whole new phone, and that is something that should not be overlooked when considering this phone. The Nexus 5 has a 2300 mAh battery capacity, which I was going to list as a negative, but with the new 5.0 Lollipop update, the battery life has been noticeably improved because of its new optimizations and new features to save the battery life. The only real negative of the Nexus 5 is its camera quality. So it is equipped with an 8 megapixel lens that actually has optical image stabilization, but for having those specs, it definitely should produce better looking images, especially in low light conditions. Swiftly moving on, the last budget phone to consider is the infamous OnePlus One. Now this phone is kind of odd because it only costs $299, completely off contract, but it has the same specs and capabilities as phones that cost more than twice as much. So for those of you spec heads, it has a quad-core Snapdragon 801 CPU with 3GB of RAM, a 5.5-inch 1080p display, a 13 megapixel camera that can film in 2160p. It basically has it all, but the only negative of this phone is that right now it is close to impossible to actually buy one of these phones. And that is due to the fact that this OnePlus One is always sold out and uses this invite-only system. But hopefully soon you will be able to buy this phone like you would with any other device. But this is one of those classic situations of high demand and low supply. So that's the end of the budget phone segment. Now it's time for the big kahunas. I find it only just to begin the list with the Google Nexus 6, because this is the newest of the bunch, and possibly the best option, especially if you're a geek. So the positives. This phone has a beautiful high-res 6-inch display with a 2K resolution. It also uses AMOLED technology, which, let's face facts, is much better than IPS. And Google wanted this awesome display to show off the new Android 5.0 Lollipop operating system, because being a Nexus device, the OS is one of the main selling points of the phone, and this newest update radically changes the design and the overall aesthetics of the OS, as well as adding some useful features like multi-user mode and battery saving mode. Also, Android 5.0 was designed to deliver a very fast and smooth experience, much like iOS, but with more animations, and generally just looking better. The Nexus 6 also does not disappoint when it comes to the specs. This phone has every latest top-line specification you could possibly want at this point in time. It has the latest Snapdragon 805 CPU, clocked in at 2.7 GHz and backed up by 3 GB of RAM. Supplying it all is a massive 3220 mAh battery. When it comes to the optics, the phone has a respectable 13 megapixel lens with OIS, and it can film video in 2160p. And as you can imagine, this can produce some excellent looking images. The funny thing is, this is one of those few phones that really have no negatives. The phone costs $650 off contract and will most likely cost about $199 with the contract. So overall, this is a fantastic option and will be the first in line to receive updates from Google. So next, let's talk about the Samsung Galaxy Note 4. Now this phone is identical to the Nexus 6 in a lot of ways. It has all the same specs, but it has a 5.7-inch display, a 16 megapixel camera, and an S Pen. But the biggest difference between the Nexus 6 and this Note is Samsung's own TouchWiz. As I mentioned, Android 5.0 is an amazing OS, but Samsung will take that OS and completely change how it looks and add a lot of random features that you may or may not use. And because Samsung adds this skin, it delays the update, so the Note will not see this major 5.0 update for months, and when it does finally get it, it will look much different in comparison to the Nexus 6. Now some people like this skin, but personally I would much rather use Android 5.0 stock the way that Google intended it to be. But moving to the next phone, this is the Moto X 2nd Gen. Now this phone also has a lot in common with the Nexus 6. After all, the Nexus 6 is actually based off of the Moto X, and the Moto X is considered to be a high-end phone, but it doesn't quite have as good top-line specs as other phones like the Nexus 6 and the new Note. So the phone has a Snapdragon 801 CPU, clocked in at 2.5 GHz, and has 2 GB of RAM. It's equipped with a 5.2-inch display with a 1080p resolution. So that means that this Moto X 2nd Gen is one of those few good phones that doesn't have a massive display. And much like the Nexus 6, this phone has an awesome build quality with a metal band going around the outside of the phone and has a single front-facing speaker. But this phone does have two negatives. One is the battery life. So the battery capacity is 2,300 milliamps. Most good phones have a capacity of about 3,000, and this battery has to fuel a Snapdragon 801 CPU and a 1080p display, so don't plan on being able to watch a lot of YouTube videos and Netflix movies without having to juice up in between. The second negative has to be the camera. So immediately I want to say that it's not bad by any means. It's a 13 megapixel lens, but it should produce better looking images, especially in low light. But most of the time, in the right conditions, it can make great looking photos and videos. The Nexus 6 is basically a big Moto X, and it doesn't have any of these negatives, but if you want a smaller display and want to save a little bit of money, then this Moto X 2nd Gen is a great option. You can't make a phone buying guide without mentioning the iPhone. So the iPhone 6 Plus is a solid phone that will make a lot of people happy. Most people have used an iPhone or an iPad in the past, and if you did, you know exactly what to expect with this new iPhone 6 Plus. One thing I do want to point out is the outstanding camera on this phone. So the iPhone 6 Plus only has an 8 megapixel camera, but it uses technology like Focus Pixel and OIS to make amazing looking photos and videos in all lighting conditions. So that is something that I did want to point out to you guys. But finally, getting to the last phone on the list, this is the new Droid Turbo. This is a Verizon only phone, which is a shame, but for those of you eligible, this phone has all of the latest top-line specs, like the Nexus 6, but in a smaller 5.2-inch display package. It also has a 21 megapixel camera, which is in the top of the class, but is still beat by the iPhone 6 Plus. But all else aside, this phone's main selling point is its huge 3,900 mAh battery capacity. So if you use your phone a lot and you need a long battery life, or if you just don't like always having to plug in your phone, then this Droid Turbo is the phone for you. So with that said, that is all the phones that I want to talk about in this video. There's basically a phone for everybody on this list. So if you guys enjoyed, then please give the video a like down below and subscribe to the channel for future videos. And I'll see you fine people in the next one. Be a proud geek, and God bless.